what was the spark that made it all come about? Was it the Big Bang or was it God?
Right.
And so I made my decision.
That's right.
You are now listening to the Knights Around the Table podcast.
Welcome back to Knights Around the Table podcast. This is episode 15. We are moving quite along here in our season 2, and very, very exciting season so far, where we've welcomed new faces to the table, new individuals, new perspectives, new stories. And today, this is it's not an exception for today either. We have Mr. Danny Jones, pastor, reverend, ordained minister. He is an in-depth in knowledge of biblical studies and theologies. And today we're going to be discussing the mysteries of Genesis. You know, the heart around this table is to sharpen one another. That's kind of every conversation, every story, every person we've had here at the table has all been brought to sharpen each other. And one of the things that's really heavy on our hearts as we continue to walk this path and this journey out into sharpening our faith is really to ask ourselves what is it we believe? And is there science proof? Is there proof of what we believe? You know, what we read in the Bible, we often grow up in Sunday school classes and felt boards, and we see all these biblical stories. But, you know, what about dinosaurs? What about evolution? You know, does the Bible say anything about that? And this is an opportunity today we've been looking forward to for a long time to really dive into that, the mysteries of Genesis. So,
not that.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Go ahead.
But also too, I think there's a lot of misrepresentation too, because some people think that even some of the Genesis stories are even metaphor too. You know, like
That's
maybe
right.
Noah's Ark can be like an allegory for, you know, God's promise or whatever. But these are things that actually happened and things that we understand to be true, and we know that are true. So
absolutely. We're very much looking forward to this conversation, and we just want to kind of dive right in and let Mr. Danny kind of lead us on this journey into what the Lord has put on his heart. So the mysteries of Genesis, Mr. Danny, what do you have for us today?
Well, our producer has kind of coached me pretty good on how to participate in a podcast. But she's drawn a pretty tight circle around our subject tonight, but I need to make that circle a little larger because I want to bring in some things that I think will help us understand about dinosaurs more. And the real question is, did dinosaurs come by way of evolution, or was it God who made them? And many people are struggling with, they want to know. They're searching for the answers to that question, and that's in both believers and non-believers. So I think it is a good subject, and if you want to look and talk about this, you really only have two sources to look to, and that is the evolution, which now they've added the word science to it. So science added to evolution sort of ratifies that they're saying that evolution is based on science. It's kind of what it all boils down to, and that's pretty heavy if you're for a first-time person coming to look at it. But the other view is the Bible-based Christian view, and that's the one that I think is a lot overwhelmed because I've seen so many people talking about that subject that really shouldn't be talking about it in a debate, because if you're not qualified, you really shouldn't try to debate somebody who is an atheist.
Right.
And because they're going to butcher you.
Yeah.
And it really makes the Christians look bad, but beyond that, it also makes people who are watching a Christian get humbled. They're kind of thinking, you know, maybe the evolutionists has got something we should pay attention to more. But there really, in my mind, there are only three questions that everybody is asking when it comes to dinosaurs. And the three questions are: how did dinosaurs get here? When were dinosaurs here? And what happened to the dinosaurs? It's fact that the dinosaurs were here.
Right.
And so that begs the three questions, you know, when what happened to them, and how did the dinosaurs get here to begin with? Was it evolution or some other process? And there are 4 things that must be available for dinosaurs to exist. And both the Christian view and the evolutionist explain these necessary items. And the 4 things are time, space, you got to have building materials to create from, and then you got to have a spark that makes it all come into reality or existence. And do we credit the Big Bang theory from evolution with what all of the universe, or is it the God of the Christian Bible who did it? And so it's a good discussion. I think there's a lot to be said here, and I certainly don't feel like I'm capable of. I'm one of those who would never sit down with someone and debate them because I'm not that qualified.
Right.
But I know what I know, and I know what I believe, and so I can share that. And if that helps someone, then I'm happy to do that. So let's begin with the first thing, which is time. And I visited a dinosaur fossil excavation site in close to Rapid City, South Dakota, and actually did that this past summer. Susan and I were up there, and we went over to this place, and there were bones and placards everywhere in this location where the people who do the excavation there have their little brushes and their little trowels and their little tools that they use to very carefully excavate these bones and then clear out an area around it so that the bone kind of stands up, or whatever it is kind of stands up, and you can focus on that. And beside of it would be a little placard that'll tell you something about that. And the thing that struck me was that the little placards were explaining how dinosaurs lived in this area 300 million years ago. And having never been to a fossil site before, that did surprise me, because I guess I never really got into the numbers associated with time. And so I Googled the age of the Earth, and I know I've heard this plenty of times, but it never registered in my mind something that I wanted to keep. And but according to Google, the Earth is 4.5 billion years old, and dinosaurs started developing around 4.2 billion years ago. And I remember back when I was I started paying attention to this subject when I was just a child. Growing up in my generation, it seemed like we were a lot more conservative then, and there were a lot more Christians and people who went to church and that kind of thing. And so we all kind of come predisposed towards the Bible-based belief. And but when I started paying attention, the time was 30,000 years. And so we've gone from 30,000 years to 300,000 years of time. And so that struck me again. And because I've noticed that exponentially it's just continued to increase as time goes by, from 30 million to 300 million. I thought 30 million was a stretch.
So you're saying the scientists' interpretation of how old the Earth has been constantly changing.
Constantly, and it's not changing back and forth, it's growing.
Yeah.
It's getting to be more time. And so evolution does not have a specific time for how the age of the Earth. They rather give a long range of time. And I heard something even today as I was watching some of the people that I like to study with on this, and they were saying that if evolutionists referred to a time like exactly 4.5 billion years ago Earth began, then that would say that there was a beginning. And they can't say that there was a beginning, because if they say it was a beginning, then they have to give place to the Christian argument.
Right.
Yeah.
That,
right.
it started somewhere at some time, at a point. And so they can't say the point. So time for them is kind of, I guess, relative to the dinosaur dig, or whatever it is, wherever you're at and that kind of thing. And so, but on the other hand, the Bible does give a specific time for the beginning, and it's right there in the first chapter and the first verse, the first sentence, and the first words of the first sentence.
Right.
It says, "In the beginning, God created."
Right.
That's the first words of the Bible, and it reads that God created, and time and everything else, including dinosaurs, started when God said created.
Right.
That's our belief and our view, and that happened about 6,000 years ago. And so, how do we know it was 6,000 years ago? Well, going to Bible school and sitting through some very boring classes, but some of the things that interested me more than others, and one of those things was the begats and the genealogies, where it talks about Abraham begat, Adam begat Seth.
Right.
He was 130 years old when he got Seth, and then he lived after he begat Seth 800 more years. So it's like 930 years of Adam's life.
Right.
And then it moves to Seth, and it says Seth was, I think, 107 years old, and he begat Enos. And then he lived after he begat Enos 805 years, which was kind of adding up. You could sit there with a calculator and you can read these begats,
right?
And you can add up, and if you do all of them in that place, you come up with 1,657 actual years to Noah.
Yeah.
And so if you go, that's in the begat section of the Bible. It kind of stops at Noah, and then you have to go to other places in the Bible, and they're in the Old Testament and the New Testament. In the New Testament, you have the genealogy of Christ through Mary, and you have the genealogy of Christ through her husband, Joseph. And so if you follow the genealogies, you're going to come up with about 6,000 years.
Right.
But there's a second way to do that, too, and that's that when time began, everybody with no modern like refrigerator and storage for food and that kind of things, people carried their flocks. Living was the refrigerator. When you got ready for meat, you took an animal and you prepared it to eat. And so they followed their flocks around, and they were called nomads, nomadic type people. All of the people were nomadic because of that reason. They had to kind of follow their flocks around to graze so that they could be fed in these areas where they were desert-like conditions. And so they were constantly moving. And so eventually they became more city dwellers as things developed. And anytime you have a city that develops, the next thing is government. And anytime you have government, you start recording history and census and that kind of thing. And so we can actually go back to the Egyptian period. We can go back to the Babylonian or the Medo-Persians, the Greeks. We can go to Romans, the Revised Romans, which is Europe, and move from there to the United States, which is where we are right now. And then all of the countries around have record keeping, and you can go to those records and you can Google them today. And if you're smart enough to read some of these languages or read the translation of these languages, you can put it together, and you're going to find a pretty airtight case following begats and genealogies that
and Christians a lot of times like to skip those genealogies, but they're there for a reason. I think God gave them to us as a help for us to be able to understand these things.
Absolutely. And something else that one time that I heard, scientists actually give us a little bit of references to how they come up with these billions and billions of years. It all revolves around that carbon dating, and it is very flawed. In fact, there was scientists that found in some Arctic location, a World War II plane that had crashed and had been buried and frozen over, and they ran the carbon dating on it. It come back to like 55 million years old. Yeah. Of course, we know that can't be true because we know the era of which, that it flew. So, yeah, even science itself has proven like flaws in their own metric system to try to, I guess, justify this Big Bang theory, this idea that everything came from this particle. And one thing that I just thought about too, when you're talking about the creator, I heard a scientist, Kent Hovind. I think I got that right. Kent Hovind. Have you ever heard of him? Man, it's just a wealth of knowledge and interesting theory that he has. But he explained it in things that I could wrap my head around. He said, when the universe was created, the creator had to be outside of time, space, and matter. That's what we know as our universe. Time being past, present, future, space being height, width, depth, and then matter being solid, liquid, gas. The creator had to be outside of that. So it'd be like the person who created the computer had to be outside of the computer to create the computer. And I never really thought about that because, when you think of in the beginning, God was, you're like, well, how does somebody exist without a beginning? Well, he was outside of that. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. We live in a time and space of matter, physical being. So it's very, very interesting when you do look at it biblically. A lot of people feel like science disproves what the Bible says. Actually, the Bible proves everything that we see around us, and is very, very clear if you can gather the knowledge and wealth of understanding of what it's saying. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. And I think that if you were in a debate, or the ones I've watched, you have a Christian who's saying to the atheist or to the evolutionist that you don't have any proof for any of this that you're saying. And his response is always right back, you don't have any proof of God. And so then comes the formula, which I enjoy. It's if X created Y, can X create X? And so if God created the universe, can God create himself? And so, that right there throws a chink in the armor, and nobody can seem to get past that. And so, but God didn't create himself. The Bible says he was always is, always was, and always shall be. Right. And so when you look at it from the bigness of God, instead of trying to put him on an even plane with facts about the universe, right? The facts will hold up pretty good.
That's right.
But when you say that God is outside of the facts because he created the facts, there would be no facts if it wasn't for God.
That's right.
And so I think that pretty well covers the subject of time in a short format. But just to recap it, the evolutionist doesn't have a specific time when it all began. What they say is it happened then, and the closest they're going to get to it is the Big Bang. And but there were actually things happening before the Big Bang because there was all these particles moving around that eventually came together, and caused the big boom. So time for an evolutionist is a question that they won't answer. But on the other hand, God gives us an answer.
Yes.
In the beginning,
yes,
God created heaven and earth. The only discussion after that is, did it happen 6,000 years ago, or did it happen millions and millions of years ago? And of course, the people that would ask that question are familiar with the Bible.
Right.
Because if you do your research, you're going to come up with that number, about 6,000 years.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah, it's very interesting, to go back and look at the genealogies that you mentioned. How, first of all, I guess we should say, sometimes I think we have we do a disservice to this study by seeing creation and seeing life then as we see it and understand it today. We can't even fathom someone today living 800 years. That just doesn't make any sense. Right. So, but back then, if you consider Adam and some of those genealogies that lived for so long, you think about, can you imagine, living at a time where you could go and talk to Adam? Like, because he lived so long that, your timeline overlaps with his.
Yeah.
It's so interesting to think about. And maybe we'll get into this later, but it is very interesting how people and animals and things, it was before the flood, you saw incredible lifespans. And there's explanations on that as well, I'm sure. But we'll continue to dive into some of this.
Yeah. To your point, we all have our relatives. I remember stories of my grandfather and my great-grandfather. I don't go much beyond that, but I do remember those stories. But can you imagine Abraham sitting down with his father and his father and maybe his granddad talking about Adam?
Right.
And they were there. They knew it. And
crazy.
So,
Crazy.
Pretty awesome.
It is.
It is awesome.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you had time. What's your next one you got on tap there?
The next one is the space.
Space. Okay.
Yeah. Genesis chapter 1, in the first verse, it says, in the beginning, God created heaven. That word heaven, I think in the translations, sometimes you get bogged down in the weeds here too much. But to me, it's an unfortunate translation in the King James Version, and some of the other Bibles that you don't respect as much has it right. And they say it's universe. In the beginning, God created the universe. And because if you go to Hebrews chapter 1, it clearly says there it's universe. And the Hebrew word there used for heaven is either plural or it's singular. And if you use it singular, it's interpreted one way. If you use it plural, it's interpreted either heaven or universe. And so all of these Bible interpreters did the best they could with what they had, and I think I have no complaint about it. But a better word for in the beginning, God created the universe is the way it should be written there. And science teaches us that the universe is large, and this blows my mind when I think about it's large enough to hold multiple galaxies, and we live in a galaxy,
right?
And I want to just talk about kind of give a size of our galaxy so we can realize the largeness of the world, because there are other galaxies. The definition of a galaxy is a system of planets that rotates around its own sun. And so that's why we are in a galaxy, because all the planets and stars in our solar system rotate around the sun. And to try and grasp the vastness of the heavens, we have to, again, rely on science. And this is greater than any of us can know with our limited mind. Somebody has to tell us that, and then we have to decide if it's true, but I believe it is. And again, we're trying to grasp the vastness of space, and so we can realize the bigness of God. And so there are 8 named planets that orbit around the sun in our solar system, and the first is Mercury, and the 8th is Neptune. Our planet is the 3rd from the sun. Each planet orbits around the sun in its own ring, and each ring is outside of the other. The one closest is farther out than the closer one to the sun. And so the sun is about 92 million miles away from the Earth. 92 million miles. Comprehend that. 92 million miles. The 8th planet from the sun is Neptune, and it's 2.7 billion miles away from the Earth, plus 92 million miles from the sun.
Jeez.
Now, if you're thinking about that like I'm thinking about it, that means that if the farthest planet is here and the Earth is here, on the other side, you got that much space too. So begins to tell you how large this solar system is. Just
Well,
this.
and not only that, I think you see, and you might be getting to this later, so forgive me if I'm getting ahead of you, but you also see God's design in that, and that, even though we're 92 million miles away from the sun, it regulates perfect temperature on the earth. It doesn't get too hot.
Right.
Well, maybe in Colombia it does, but, but it doesn't get too hot and it doesn't get too cold. It's in the perfect spot. And I don't think a Big Bang could explain.
That's right. To sustain life. I heard it one time, and I don't know how scientific it is, but if the earth was moved off of its rotation around the sun like 3 feet, I think, or something like it was a small number, it would be too cold to for things to grow in certain times. We couldn't inhabit the earth. So it was absolutely, it's an intelligent design that put this thing right on that perfect path, and even to cause the earth to tilt on its axis to give us those growth seasons and things. It's amazing. Science and a Big Bang cannot explain how that's even possible other than coincidence.
Well, let me just point out right here, that's a good point of why average Joe shouldn't debate with scientists, because if you move 2 or 3 feet, the earth does move 2 or 3 feet by the seasons from the sun. And so that's not exactly right, but it is true that the principle you're speaking of, the sun is in the exact spot that it should be in for all seasons.
Right.
And so we move away from the sun, we move closer to the sun. That gives us our seasons, and the seasons are important.
Exactly.
And God said, as long as the earth is here, there will be the seasons. Winter, summer, spring, and fall will be the 4 seasons we will enjoy. So, but yeah, we're talking about the vastness of space. And there's space beyond planet. In fact, they say the closest star is 25 trillion miles from Earth. And so that's in our solar system. And I got that off of the website, and I'm not, it's hard for me to fathom that, much less grasp it, but it's what's said, 25 trillion miles out there, the furthest star, and that's part of this galaxy, and there are other galaxies out there. It just gives you, it blows your mind how big this is, which this is not about this subject, but it does give opportunity for me to speak to aliens and other solar systems out there, and the possibility that they exist. And I wouldn't rule out the fact that God has other civilizations in other places. I heard one preacher talking about he forsook he left the 99 safely in the fold, and he went out looking for that one, and that one was the earth in its place here inside of where we are. And so that is a possibility that there are other civilizations out there beyond us in other galaxies, and God has placed them so far apart that we will probably never meet. And that might be a good reason if we're corrupt and they're not. And so maybe we don't. But it does bring up and beg the question, if I fly to the farthest star, 25 trillion miles from the earth, and somehow or another I'm nailing a nail on the wall and I hit my finger with a hammer and I curse, did I sin at 25 trillion miles away from the earth? Or does the astronaut that's at the space station, whatever they do up there that might be sin, is it sin because they're not on the earth? And so there's a lot to this subject to grasp. But if you think about, we're inside of a galaxy here, and you hit your finger, it doesn't matter where you are.
Right.
You can't sin because God created us in this thing. Now, going outside of that galaxy, if you're not corrupt, if there's no corruption beyond this galaxy, you wouldn't do it anyway. And so, shouldn't have probably said that.
It is interesting to think about, for sure.
Yeah. If you believe evolution, you would have to know that all the planets and things in space, as well as the Earth, had to evolve first, so that the dinosaurs could be here. All of it had to come into place first, because a dinosaur can't exist unless conditions are right. You mentioned the sun. And so that was one of the things that had to evolve and be there in its place, exactly in its place, so that a dinosaur could evolve. So that's the second thing, is space. God created it all. It's our galaxy is what we call it. I don't know what he calls it. He calls it the heavens and the universe. But the third thing is the building materials. And it's another interesting thing. When you think about the building materials, if you're thinking about evolution, well, the building materials had to be here because there's no, everything came from the Big Bang, and the Big Bang came from materials. And so the materials had to be here, if you're thinking evolution,
right,
in order to create a dinosaur, for time to create a dinosaur. And as you mentioned, the sun had to find its perfect spot in the universe, the perfect spot. And the moon and the other planets that have to do with the chemistry of existing on Earth had to be there to control gravity and to block radiation, to block meters that fall from the sky, and asteroids had to evolve so that those things that are falling wouldn't hit the Earth and destroy it. And the stars had to be there for navigation. You know, I heard this a long time ago, but I read it. I Googled it. The sea turtles, when they're hatched, they use the stars to find the sea. And then when they get in the sea, they use the stars to navigate around and make their travels thousands and thousands and thousands of miles. So if that's true, I have no reason to think why it wouldn't be. Those sea turtles couldn't exist without the stars out there. Right. So to get there, they had to evolve. They all had to become a part of the system in order for something as common and as seemingly unimportant as sea turtles. And
well, then, you have other stuff too, like how our atmosphere and gravity, how it holds everything in place. And then also too, with all the different gases in the atmosphere that, you know, it regulates the perfect amount of oxygen for life to be sustained and stuff. Right. It's just, I don't know, it's incredible design.
And once again, the Bible proves all these things because in the order of which the days of creation was laid out, we see that all these things, God put all the pieces in place that it needed to be in place, and then he brought on life. And so this is, the Bible is just pointing us right in the direction of that valid proof that we're talking about here.
Well, to your point, Evan, clouds had to evolve to regulate the temperature and the rain so that, animals everything could exist, trees, whatever. You had to have the water, you had to have the trees, you had to have the plants, the nutrients, the omnivore animals to supply the carnivores with food. You had to have oxygen and other gases, and not just there, but at the perfect mixture so that it would support life. And it doesn't just support life, but it's like trees use a different gas.
It's like a give and take, you know.
Yeah. But what if you had too much of that for the trees and not enough?
Yeah.
And then we have to have a little bit of that in ours. So the mixture is not just important for everything. It's important for individuals.
Right.
It's a different combination. That blows my mind.
Right.
It's a different amount of each one of these gases for that specific thing that it supports. And so you had to have medication, you had to have minerals, you had to have products for clothing, and you had to have fire, gravity, as you spoke of. And some of the first building blocks were carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, which is given the credit for the Big Bang. And all of these materials and more had to evolve before a dinosaur could evolve and survive. And evolution assumes that these materials were already here, or at least some of them were already here, and that there again, you got two distinct views. God created everything when he created on day one. And evolution says these things came about over time, but some of them, everything came from something that was already here. So, and they can't trace it back to that one thing other than the Big Bang. At some point, you got to admit this with me. It takes more faith to believe in evolution than it does to believe in.
Well, and
Yes.
I heard an example, and this is such a simple example, but I think it explains it because, I mean, if this can't happen, then surely the Big Bang couldn't happen. But somebody said, if you put a bunch of ingredients, say for a cake in a paper bag, and you sit there and you shake that paper bag for 100 million years, what's the chances it's going to make a fully formed cake for you at the end of that million years? And that's effectively what the Big Bang is, but on a grander scale. A bigger bag with a lot more materials. So.
Yeah,
Right. Right.
and actually, the Big Bang created the materials that weren't at the store to buy for the cake. So,
Yeah.
so that's
It's a flawed theory for sure.
well, to hear these evolutionists and atheists on debates, so forth, their argument is so strong, but I always see a elevation of anger. The closer you get to having a good argument for whatever they're arguing for, you start to see a rise in temperature with the atheists. I heard one today tell the other guy to shut up and let him finish talking. And I just thought, that's not really in place in this setting,
Right.
in front of a large audience. But it escalates because you're challenging everything they believe.
Yeah.
The fourth thing for creation was the spark. And that began at creation. Well, if you believe evolution, 4.5 billion years ago, the Big Bang happened. And then dinosaurs eventually evolved from parts from the big explosion. Some parts were already here and some parts evolved from parts. Atoms combined to make molecules. Molecules combined to make molecular structures. Molecular structures combined to make sinew, and sinew eventually became a body, and then the body developed into heart, lungs, different kinds of things. And so that's kind of the way of the evolutionist thinking. But the Bible tells the whole story of creation in one chapter. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth.
Right.
And if you read Genesis 1 and you read it with a mind to listen to every question you might have about creation, it's somehow answered there. Or if you don't interpret it in what's said, you can go to somebody who can help you see whatever you're looking for in that. But I want to close my little part with this and mention a strange creature. Well, let me just go ahead and say, answer the question. We got the spark, but there was a global flood 1,657 years after creation. And so that killed all the dinosaurs when the flood came, except for maybe two. And they went on the ark. And if they went on the ark, they were a representation of the dinosaur kind, meaning that they represent, from their genes, every dinosaur that existed could come from this pair that went onto the ark.
Right.
But that still doesn't answer the question to what happened to the dinosaurs. That sort of just kind of throws a little bit of a kink into it. But maybe God didn't bring the dinosaurs onto the ark. Maybe he saw that man, there's good evidence and argument that man was a lot larger, a lot more vital. And you can see that in the age, in the beginning. But as time progressed and sin began to abound more and more, man began to change. And so there was no there's no way to compete against an animal that weighs 70 tons.
Yeah.
And these vicious animal with 8 people and a growing herd of dinosaurs. So I can see where God did not bring the dinosaurs to the ark for that reason, because they were outclassing the other people. But there are other serious points, like the guy who was a mighty hunter. What was his name?
Nimrod.
Nimrod, who was a mighty hunter before the Lord. And people have wondered about that because that's all it says. Nimrod was a mighty hunter before the Lord. And everybody kind of thinks, associates him with the Tower of Babel, and that he built a hostile, vicious group of people. But could it be that Nimrod was, if you look at a hunter, I've always said they got to have the right rifle, they got to have the right clothing, they got to have the right four-wheel drive pickup, they got to have the right dog box in the back of their truck, you got to have the right sticker on the back glass. You got to have all these things to be a hunter. They take it that serious. And I watched a film of a guy in Africa who would shoot animals, but he would wait till they get as close as I am to Jonathan before he would pull the trigger. I mean, they have a certain motivation and drive to go after the biggest and to go after the most dangerous with the simplest weapons and kill them. So I can see that too. Nimrod was a mighty hunter before the Lord, and he wanted those trophies on the wall. But the one creature that I wanted to close with is found in Job chapter 41. Have you ever read about him?
Yeah.
He's described as a kind of what we know as what was the thing? Dragon. As a dragon.
Yep.
He's got fire coming out of his mouth, smoke coming from his nostrils. He breathes on wood, dry wood, and it flames. And so one of those guys might have been back there. And just like it's described in Job chapter 41, because you know who was telling Job that story?
God, wasn't it?
It was God. God was saying Job, because Job was complaining, saying, I don't deserve what's happened to me. You have picked me out, and you have brutally abused me. And God, at some point, listened till he got tired of it, and he said, where were you? And then he began this great litany, and he described this creature that he created. And so the fourth necessary thing, what was the spark that made it all come about? Was it the Big Bang, or was it God?
Right.
And so I made my decision.
That's right.
Well, and I wanted to go back to the discussion on the ark, because I think a lot of things can come from some either conclusions drawn or assumptions made about the ark. So to your point, I mean, I think that at least my perception has always been the two of a kind thing. Like, so instead of there being like 2 Boston Terriers, 2 Dachshunds, 2 whatever, you have 2 dogs or 2 house dogs, or even broader, you have 2 canines like wolves. And then from that, then starts another discussion. So obviously we know that evolution theory is more scientific, more atheist based. And I think too, there's a way in which Christians can think about creation and then what happens after the ark as a process that God ordains. So I think what I'm trying to say is, I think there can be adaptation divorced from evolution, right? Because I mean, if it's the 2 of a kind theory, then you start,
That's microevolution.
Yeah. You get from the canine to all your other species and so on and so forth. So
yeah, and the other thing, so after the creation, we have 3 distinct time periods that the environment changed drastically. So after creation, all the way to the garden being sinned, or the when they got evicted from the garden. So that was basically a utopia during that time. And from my understanding, for how I've been taught and looked into it, there was no rain, there was no hot, no cold, no clouds, just sun up, sun down. But it was perfect temperature. No, I guess they wouldn't. Maybe they could stub their toes, but no pain for the most part. I mean, they didn't even wear clothes. So then after sin, became introduced and they were evicted from the garden, then you had a different environment. Sin was now introduced to the world. So you do have consequences and stuff like that. And then after, well, they also lived to, 900 something years old. Then after the flood, the environment changed drastically. I believe 130 was the longest lifespan after that. Then you also have, because they'd never seen rain up to that point. So it wasn't like when God was saying, or Noah was preaching to all the people, like there's going to come a great flood. That was like, they couldn't comprehend that because they'd never seen it. They didn't even know about it. So you also got to put yourself in those shoes. Like, would you believe Noah? Some guy who looked crazy coming and telling you this stuff. So then after that changed, now our world, like we know today, we can't really grasp, like you said, if you live 6, 7, 8, 900 years was your lifespan. They hadn't even discovered the North American continent until 1492 was when Christopher Columbus came over. So you could have been on that boat and still have another 300 years left to live. So you can't comprehend that. That's a little different. But if you factor in all those things, you could come to, or it wouldn't be easier to understand this or believe this, but also being a Christian, we know what we believe. So when we look at the facts and the scientific evidence, if it doesn't support our belief or the Bible, then we dismiss it and we're like, well, that can't be true. That can't be right. We have to look for different evidence to support that. Same thing with the secular, scientists. If they believe in the Big Bang or whatever form of creation, if it doesn't support their theory, because they've already chosen that is what they believe, then they immediately dismiss it and they have to find something else that supports it. So I understand what they're saying. So if they say, like you said, they keep adding time to the creation period, if it's 4.5 billion years, in theory, even though as small of a chance it would be for the sun to be just right to the earth at just the right tilt to get the correct amount of oxygen to carbon dioxide ratio to have earth, if it would either work or if it didn't, because you can see it doesn't work with Mars and Mercury and Venus and all those, but it works with Earth. So it's not necessarily that it was a coincidence that it happened to you in particularly. It just happened. Same with like if you throw seed out in your yard and it lands on the concrete or birds come pick up the other stuff, they won't grow. But where it does land and it does work, it just works. So I kind of understand what they're saying. It doesn't make them right. I mean, we clearly believe the Bible. We know that. Yeah. That is what we believe wholeheartedly. But that's where they get their argument from. And I understand that. It's just, we don't believe it's
and
correct.
That would make sense. I mean, that would be a valid argument if that was the only thing that happened by chance. The fact, though, that everything happens so perfectly. I mean, you cut your arm. Your arm immediately goes into, your body goes into a healing.
There's so much that you can't explain by that. And the Bible does.
Though, and one of the things that I think stumbles us up is we look at creation and life at the beginning of God's creation through the lens of what we see today. And what we see today we know is very different. I heard a scientist talk about reptiles and how reptiles never stop growing. As long as they live, their bodies grow. And he put something out there that I've never really even considered before. He showed a picture of a 15-year-old alligator that had been hunted and killed, and they strung it up. That thing was huge. And it was only 15 years old or something like that. And his argument was for the dinosaurs, he's like, just like people living 900 years, he's like, can you imagine a reptile that lived that long, the size and the scale? I hadn't really ever thought about that. We sometimes maybe think about that these were and they could have been these separate, individual animals that just kind of no longer exist. There's a lot of examples of that, things that go extinct or things that God maybe chooses not to carry on. But, I hadn't really ever considered that even at that time period, those animals, life was so different. Things were so different. And, But I do think it's very interesting because the Bible, these scientific findings do not disprove the Bible. They only further prove a lot of the things that we see even in the beginning. And something else that I thought was pretty fascinating, the word dinosaur, it was not invented until after the 1600s. So people say, well, why isn't dinosaur written in the Bible? Well, back in Bible times, that was not even a word. Leviathan, you'll see that in the Bible.
Behemoth or
something
dragon,
like that. Right. Even the word, very interesting here, this is a little fun nugget, the word unicorn is in the Bible. Unicorn. And, we think of unicorn as a horse with a horn on it. That might not have been at all what it is, but there are these things in the way, even life was different, even in how they explained and saw the world around them from what we see and understand today. So we have to take all that into consideration in this conversation. But I think it's one that as you dig into this, through the conversation of the dinosaurs, through the conversation of the flood, the creation, I think as we allow the Holy Spirit to use that word of God, I think it will only reaffirm and build a stronger foundation on what we believe, why we believe it, and also bring validity to the Bible and the truth that lies within. So,
Yeah.
Well, this is besides the point, but another thing I find kind of funny is, the initial models of the dinosaurs, they have, it looks like a reptile skin, but more recently they've been floating around this theory that they could have feathers. Have you seen that? They look more silly when they have feathers and stuff. But
the other thing I thought about, so you said there potentially could be aliens or another race that, or not race, another creation, another form of life that God may have. That potentially already took place with the angels at some point. So then they already, I don't know if they went through their whole, like what we're currently going through or however that worked out. But if there is another one, the chances of us as a human race running into or having interaction with one, I would say it'd be nothing. Because if you remember in the Tower of Babel, they decided to build a big tower up to heaven, and I'm not exact. I would assume they were scattered not because they were being productive in creating something,
right?
But because they were, I guess, thought they were godlike, maybe, or they were able to do anything. But then, if you think about it, we have put people on the moon. We have International Space Station. We've sent stuff to Mars. We've far exceeded building a really tall building. And I mean, I don't know. Nothing's different. Nothing has come like any sort of punishment, or we haven't been scattered, to my knowledge, any more than just sheer physics trying to overcome it and cultural stuff that's already been implemented after that. But it's if we haven't run into any setbacks after the accomplishments the human race has had since then, I don't see where there would be a chance or something like that could take place as far as interacting with another alien life form or something.
Well, and that starts to bring up I know you were talking about the corruption and sin and stuff with that. Yeah, it brings up a lot of theological arguments, right? Like would there have been sin on other planet life forms? And then is there a version of Jesus for that life form, for that corrupted
You
world?
mean could they still be like in their Garden of Eden period?
Well,
sin hadn't been introduced yet.
Well,
Because if Eve and Adam had never eaten the apple, would have sin eventually been introduced? Because that's a great question in theory.
Yeah, but I was just thinking, like, let's just say if the theory that there are aliens or whatever, or another life form, I guess the argument would be if they did become corrupt, then they would have to have their own, way of redemption. Yeah. So, I tend to lean on the side of there's probably not, but that's just me. So
yeah, it's there's a lot of what ifs because we don't understand God. That's out of the source because we can't comprehend His ways. We can't comprehend His existence. We can't comprehend His power. Sitting, talking, and thinking about the size of the universe. That's crazy. And that all came from a spoken word. So we can't wrap our head around that. So absolutely, if God wanted there to be life in another place, I mean, he has the power to do it. But I think one of the things that perhaps maybe even trips us up a little bit in our walk is the desire to understand everything there is to know and understand about God. The fact is, if we could understand and know everything there is about God, it wouldn't be a God worth worshiping and serving. If our little feeble minds could comprehend everything there is to know. So God is powerful. The word is true. And more, you would almost think, and some scientists would almost think or say that the more science is introduced, the more it disproves God. But actually what it does is show us that his fingerprint is all over everything. So it's really, really interesting. And this has been a very fun conversation. And so I guess this brings us to our final segment of the podcast, questions from the basket.
Yeah, are these just general questions
from the basket?
Yeah, okay,
here we go.
All right, and this is for everybody, or this is for Mr. Danny?
Mostly Mr. Danny, but everybody can.
Okay. All right. What do you think about the 24-hour theory that a day is not a day? So that like the day is 1,000 years thing.
Or the days of creation.
6 true days of creation versus like 6,000 years of creation.
But 1,000 years is equal to a day as a prophetic use for that term.
Right.
But the Bible says in the beginning, when God created day one, the evening and the morning was the first day, and so it gives us a parameter around a day, a 24-hour day. So a 24-hour day back then is what the same 24-hour that we have today.
That's good.
And the 7-day cycle, which the Sabbath day is a day of rest, that if God hadn't created that and loved this model so much that he's protected it, by now we wouldn't be on a 7-day cycle.
Right.
We would be on something else. Wouldn't maybe not even recognize a cycle. It'd just be day one, day two, right on. So, yeah.
Well, that's also interesting side note there, that the measurement of time has been consistent since the beginning.
Yeah.
So, and I mean, not down to just the year, 365 days a year, but 24-hour days.
Right.
And I mean, even in Job, it says his children would have his oldest son was celebrating his birthday, had all his, and that's when the roof fell on him. So they knew to the day when they were born. So they were measuring it the same time. And you said what Job was when the first spoke wheel was.
Historically, that's what they say that
was invented.
Yeah,
because he falls in the timeline somewhere in Genesis, though, right? Too,
right.
As far as like
so that it was toward the beginning. So there was, what I'm saying is there wasn't enough. I guess technology or it wasn't like Roman times. Like Romans and the Egyptians even had a good bit of technology that they had discovered and created. That was way too early for all that to come about, and yet they still knew that. So, right. I mean, I don't know if when Adam was created, God told him, "Hey, 365 days," and I don't know how they measured it, because if some days I forget what day of the week it is. So how would you know that? They didn't have any sort of calendar or anything, I wouldn't imagine. And I mean, unless he was marking on his...
I think God created it at the beginning, the system and the...
Well, basically, he gave us he says for the days and the weeks and the years, he gave us the planets.
Right.
And so the Earth rotates 300, rotates around the sun in a year. It rotates around on its own axis in 24 hours. So that's the way we've been able to keep a benchmark so that we haven't gotten away from.
Right. But who told them that? How did they figure that out?
Well, those are mysteries that I would say that there were some very smart people, because early on, I mean, how did the shepherds know where Jesus was by following the star? How did they know that the star was telling them to where Christ was going to be born? They were those astrologers that studied the heavens way back during that time, and so they were smarter than we think. A proof of that is to build a Tower of Babel. They had some sharp engineers.
Was that pre-flood?
The
Tower of Babel?
No, it was after the flood.
So, well, I mean, I guess it'd have to if
They scattered from
Scattered
the nations.
and- yeah, he wouldn't have to scatter them if he had the flood. So, but it's and also though the pre-flood, if you, I guess one thing a lot of people may not think about, if you live to be 900 years old, the most knowledgeable people in our society are your elders, your older people who've seen everything, experienced all this stuff. So the amount of knowledge they have, if you could multiply that by, let's say if the average person lives 70, so multiply that by 9 or 10, you're going to be, can you imagine the knowledge you could share and, how productive you could be, not only to have that knowledge at, 100 and 200, 300 years old, but still be able to move and act like you were, in your 30s, 40s. I would assume that's how it was going on, but it was, so you could be very productive.
Oh, yeah.
And retain a lot of knowledge and pass it on also.
That's right.
Well, speaking of that, so that kind of goes to our second question. Thoughts on the firmament change after flood? In other words, allowing things to not live as long. And doesn't he give a reason for that? I feel like there was a reason given for that. That no man's years would be no longer than 120 years or whatever it was. There's a verse that says that. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Do you remember what was the reasoning for that?
For the shortening of man.
Yeah.
Well, I've always understood that it was the increase of sin, and that as sin became more and more, the point that Jonathan was making there about the brilliance of people back pre-flood versus what they are today. Everything was better back in that time, and one of the reasons was they had a relationship with God. He communed with them, he talked with them, he explained things to them if they had questions. He didn't come say, "Don't bother me today. I got a headache. Come back another time." He talked with them. I would say that the universe was explained by God to those people, those writers back in those days. So, I don't know if that answers your question, but
I've also heard medically and again, this could be totally a wrong number here, but we do not use the 100% of our brain capacity. It's impossible for us to do that. And there's biblical theorists that believe that at the beginning of creation that the brain was functioning at 100% capacity as it should have. And I don't even know what that would look like. When you think about that medically, like what would that what would we be able to do with 100% of our brain? So anyway, it's just a lot of theory that we will never know for sure, but that we can deduce the principle and the truth based on scripture.
Yeah.
Yep.
Last question. How long do you think the time was, with Adam and Eve after they were created and then before they sinned? So, the gap between, man and woman come together as one versus the fall.
I will answer that question for you if you'll answer this question for me.
Oh,
How old was Adam and Eve when they were created?
that's a good one.
I hadn't thought about that.
Were they children?
No, they were at least 30.
Were they 60? Were they 90? Were they in their childbearing years? Were the years for childbearing longer?
I'll say this. I imagine they were at least reproductive age because before the fall, he said, "Be fruitful and multiply." Right, so they would have had to have been.
But they might not have understood.
But I would. That is a good question because it also gives Adam's age when he had Seth. But was that from his day of? It would have to be his day of creation. But
that's very.
But also the reason I think he would be an adult, at least 31. Jesus started his ministry at 30, and everything kind of repeats. And so that's a theory I've heard, and I'm gonna go with that one. But also. The earth was created mature.
Yeah.
So if the earth was created mature, I would assume he's going to be consistent in all of this.
Here's a question or a theory. Before sin was introduced, was there such thing as aging? I don't know.
Yeah, well,
because
and the other thing, did Adam have a belly button?
Yeah. Well, he wasn't. He
That's
didn't
the
have a mama.
question. Yeah.
So these are questions that we will not have definite answers to, but it is fun and interesting to talk about. Yeah, going back to children's church, I often thought to myself, okay, 7 days of creation or whatever, or 6 days, seventh day rest. 8th day was when they were chomping on that's what my mind. But it says in the scripture that Adam had to name the creation.
Yeah.
So this isn't a process that's going to take. There could have been 1,000 years. No one really.
Well, it
knows.
also said that he was 150 when he had Seth, or
130.
130. So he couldn't have been before that, because he also said that Eve would childbirth would be painful, all that. So if it was painful and she had Seth, it at least had to be 130 years after. So,
but he had 2 sons before he had Seth.
Right.
Okay, well, whatever
Seth
the
was
first
the third.
son was,
Cain and Abel.
Cain and
Cain,
Abel,
that's right. But they were in sin because Cain killed Abel, so they're out of the garden by then.
That's right.
Well, I think that something else, if you want to talk like this, you can throw in there. Before pre-flood stage of Earth was vastly different from it is now. It was more health, more wisdom, more of everything. There was divine. But something that's always puzzled me is a question. The question is, when the animals came to the ark, were the animals capable of talking? Could they walk up to Adam and say, God sent me here? Or Adam,
You mean Noah?
Noah say to, hello, John dear, how are you doing today? And then you got, you're here, you're on the list. And I really believe that animals had communication skills pre-flood that they lost, because the Bible says, if you read what happened to the animals after they came off the boat, they came to the boat and they were excited. They wanted to get on, they got on. But when they got off, the door was open and they ran. And man was given the privilege of eating meat, flesh. So they were victims at that point. They came on as friends and they went off as victims.
Wow.
And so when the door was open, they fled for their life. So the whole world changed at that moment.
Well, even I think about how the Lord gathered the animals to get on the ark. What a sight that would have been, just seeing them line up in a queue like a roller coaster, just seeing all of them lined on, stretched for, miles.
Yeah.
It's just, or if maybe it wasn't a queue, maybe it was more like, 2 come here and then 2 come there. It's wild to think about.
And again, I think it's very important to understand the idea that we are guilty of viewing all of these things through the lens and understanding of today's world. And we can't do that because it is such a different thing and a different time. I think if anything has come from this conversation, it has been the understanding that God is a big God and that his creation is amazing. And not only that, the Bible is true. And as the more we dig into these things, we see that all the evidence we need is right there in the scripture. There's some things that we have theory on. There's some things we don't understand. And you know what? That's okay, because the scripture says we live by faith and not by sight. And so one day, maybe the mysteries of Genesis will be revealed when we're all in heaven together. But I think it's very important that that we use things like this to dig deep wells of faith and deep wells of understanding of what we believe and why we believe it, because the world around us wants to know. And we have to know. If we don't know what we believe and why we believe it, how can we stand in a world with a lot of questions? So, but this has been a great conversation. And if there's nothing else, we want to encourage our leaders and listeners to stay sharp, stay strong. Join us back for next week, episode 16, and we cannot wait to see you then. Until then, stay sharp and have a great day.